What is a god exactly in Genshin Impact and in Teyvat? Because if we just go off the literal definition that they give us, they are beings from the human realm with great control over the elemental energy and whose lifespans are much longer than that of a regular mortal. There are many circumstances which mortals can ascend to godhood as well, such as allogenes like Venti describes. But besides that, what does it exactly mean to be a god? Because we know there's no shortages of gods, whether it be archons, celestial beings, descenders, people from other dimensions or even other worlds, or more trivial type of gods like the god of salt, the god of stoves, the god of herbs. There is no shortage of gods and all varieties in Genshin Impact, but what does it even mean to be a god? Or is that the point all along? That it's so diluted, the concept of being a god. And much like in our own real world, it solely depends on who worships you or follows you. Like your everyday human in our own real world, I'm sure in Teyvat, anybody with celestial powers or origin, elemental powers, long lifespan, probably seems like a god to the average person. What is the criteria? Is it the creation of life? Having people that worship you or follow you? Would the Dore, the doctor, be considered a god if he can create clones of himself and artificial beings? It is such a vague term, but we're going to be going over all of that in this video. But I do think I ultimately have the answer. Don't worry, I will be asking a lot of questions in this video, but they are for the most part rhetorical questions because we have to go over the criteria of a god, all of the different beings in Teyvat in different circumstances. Starting with the most obscure one, Paimon, who we know almost nothing about, but just by looking at her you can tell she's not from this world. She's a celestial being. From her design, the crown on her head, her color scheme, the way she floats around, the way almost every NPC that we meet doesn't know who Paimon is or where she's from, even the archons and oldest beings, and they even hint that she has celestial, Seelie-like vibes and that she's from the sky. So I mean, she's a celestial being or from the heavens one way or another. She's a main character in this game, so it just makes sense. Everything about her seems off. And she has a demon named Paimon. Who she is exactly we don't know. I still believe her to be the primordial one, being that the crown on her head and how the artifacts represent the primordial one and its shades. It just seems the most obvious to me, the symbol on her chest, everything like that. But there are some interesting theories that she might be a moon sister, another type of Seelie, or even a shade itself. Either way, I do think she would classify as a god in Genshin's terms. Yet, she seems to be in a weakened state and lost a lot of her previous memories or something, because we found her almost drowning. I guess the term god is hard to explain, because even in Teyvat, some of the most powerful beings that are considered gods in the world of Genshin Impact, they feel emotion, heartbreak, loss, and they suffer from PTSD, stress, and are basically such human qualities that you wonder why they're a god at all. You know, they make mistakes. The only difference is they hold positions of high power and are very powerful with long lifespans. But yet, they almost have exact same characteristics as humans, with just slightly more power and more responsibility. Somebody like the Raiden Shogun or Zhongli, Venti, these characters have the almost identical qualities as a regular person, but they're in a position of power, and they make mistakes like anyone would. And although this would make a god more relatable, what is so divine about that? And I think that's the entire point. There's nothing divine about that. And that is, I think, not only why the Fatui Harbingers and Piero are doing what they're doing, but that is also why we see within every nation, gods and archons and beings alike are all trying to take on human forms, be a part of humanity, and live somewhat normal lives, trivial lives. It's sort of strange that all these very divine beings are just kind of joining in humanity and trying to blend in. Don't you find that incredibly weird? In some aspects, gods are beings from the human realm in Genshin with great control over elemental energy and whose lifespans are much longer than that of mortals, or they cannot be completely killed. But then that raises the question, can somebody like the Dore, who can probably preserve himself for eternity through science and intellect, can he be considered a god then? Because if that is the criteria, he is powerful and he can create a long lifespan for himself. Genshin's done a great job of giving us next to nothing about the origins of gods, or what makes them divine, such as characters like Barbados or Andreas, the wolf god in Mondstadt, are gods expected to have love and devotion to humanity? Are they meant to be humanity's leaders, guide them and act as somewhat butlers to them? Because some gods have little to no love for humanity, and yet some gods, their duty is to uphold guiding humanity, yet they fail at it miserably, while some of them do an okay job. That is the most human thing I've ever heard of. Inconsistency in making mistakes in what you're supposed to do. And then where do the dragons fit in? Because the elemental dragons and sovereigns have powers and abilities that rival gods that we know of in Teyvat. Are they gods as well? Or are they just dragons? And can you be a god only if labeled by whoever's following you? A god's power flows out of their body and into the surrounding environment. The consequences of a god's death vary greatly, so what determines the result is currently unclear. Andreas, the wolf god in Mondstadt, was able to control the flow of power and use it to benefit the land, after he voluntarily chose his death. Whereas on Yashiori Island, Orobashi, the great serpent god, his remains actually poisons the land and corrupts everyone within the radius. And this poison from dead god remains doesn't just affect mortals and humans alike. The Seven have come up with various ways to counteract such effects. An example of this we see with the Yaksha and Liyue, who fight against the power of ancient gods. Based on what we know in Teyvat, which I don't even know can be trusted with Irminsul manipulation and whatnot, most if not all gods come into being after the establishment of the human realm, which was allegedly after the primordial one came, defeated the dragons and took over Teyvat, created Celestia and its 4 shades. So maybe creation of life, conquering a new world, and being able to control different aspects of our known universe such as time, space, life, and death is the ultimate criteria. But then what's the point of having all of these other gods? Most gods in Teyvat answer to Celestia, but Celestia itself in its origins is also vague. Was it created by a descender or somebody from outside of Teyvat? Wouldn't that classify them more as an alien than a god? But if they were able to create life, maybe that is what a god is. But then that begs the question, was life already existing on Teyvat before descenders showed up? We know there was the dragons, but were humans here all along? With the manipulation of Irminsul, perhaps one could change everyone's memories and the creation of Teyvat. Maybe humans here were all along. And in order to become a god and quote-unquote your creations and life that you give in these humans, you manipulated Irminsul to change everyone's memories and the origin of Teyvat. It's really hard to say because we know next to nothing about it. Obviously we know of the Archon War where all the gods in Teyvat fought for a gnosis. Some gods were already aligned with each other and hold dominion in certain areas, but something that seems to be a constant and consistent when it comes to talking about gods in Genshin isn't necessarily the creation of life. It seems to be power and control. Whether it be Celestia in its true origins, whether it be creation or manipulation, the Archons battling for a gnosis and control over one of the 7 nations, it seems to be a lot about control and power, not about divinity or transcending humanity. Because like I talked about, gods seem to have a lot of the same qualities as humanity. So what makes them so divine? What gives them the right to hold dominion over anyone or anything? Besides the fact that they can control you and have the power to do so, or influence. That also raises a lot of questions about the Harbingers and the Fatui organization, because they pretty much stand against everything we just talked about exactly. They're rebelling against the divine, Celestia, the idea of gods, and seizing control from the gnosis of every nation. That is their entire objective. And the nation of Conria's entire existence, and one of the biggest identities that it had, was that it didn't have a god. And it didn't even need one to thrive or pose a threat to all the other nations with a god. It was a godless nation that thrived and took on the entire rest of Teyvat and almost won. And 500 years later, you have an organization and the Fatui Harbingers who not only are seizing control from all the other gods and their archons and everyone within, but they might even be manipulating the Cryo Archon to do this as well, because the Jester, Piero, a royal mage from Conria, might just be pulling the strings behind everything we're seeing right now. I have an entire video talking about him coming up, but I do find it an interesting contrast of how him and his organization represent humanity seizing control back. And what makes it even more interesting is, like we talked about, the only consistent criteria in Teyvat that I can find when it comes to what a god actually is seems to be control and power. And that is exactly what Piero and his followers are doing. You could almost say that Conria and the Harbingers represent humanity taking control and power back from gods or just powerful beings. They don't even regard them as gods. You know, you got the Harbingers, who are as powerful as gods, can take Gnosis and take nations by storm. And you got the first Harbinger, Capitano, who has a reputation as being a mortal who can defeat gods in the battlefield. That's miraculous. Maybe that's the entire point of this game. I have been saying for years that the oversaturation of gods and the negative impact that gods actually have in this game is the entire point of this whole story. That is why Genshin Impact translates to God's Impact. And why all of the gods that aren't actually terrible are just trying to blend in with humanity now. Or have even taken on a human form themselves just to be a human and live as a human. Maybe that's the entire point of this whole game, is the oversaturation of gods and letting humanity rule itself, live its own lives. We won't know the true origin of Teyvat for many years if humans always were here, if Irminsul has been manipulated time and time again, but ultimately Celestia is the highest hierarchy of gods that we have in Teyvat. Even the other smaller tier gods are afraid of it. Celestia is more like a corrupt government than an all-righteous, all-knowing, benevolent type of deity or being. And with Irminsul, they have mass control over everything. I mean, they already do, but they can control how you perceive things and the memory and history of the world and what they want you to perceive as the history. The true history is lost. And that is why I think we are foreshadowed Irminsul being burned by these same people who are trying to overthrow this government, I guess you could say. This godly government. This godly, corrupt, evil government, in a sense. And why Conria was godless as well. What I love about Genshin is there's no clear good or bad guys in the game. It's not so cut and dry, but you wouldn't have organizations like the Fatui Harbingers even exist if there wasn't something very, very wrong with the false sky and the fake world constantly mentioned. So then we circle back around to the question I asked at the beginning of the video. What is a god? And that is just it. It's nothing. It's just words. It's an empty term. It's a term that whoever hijacked Teyvat at whatever point in time and took over Irminsul and hijacked the entire history of this world from the dragons and possibly the humans that lived here, it's just the term that they gave elemental beings from the human realm that they created when they hijacked it. It's a concept to keep the people shackled, to rule over the people of Teyvat, to give people figures to worship, changing the perception of history to make sure you're always benevolent and in power, to manipulate on a mass scale, to pin the humans and the Bishop/dragons against each other, but to never let them forget you have absolute authority, just like a government. And just like a corrupt government, gods come in tiers. That is why the 7 Archons answer to Celestia. They get sentenced to death, or bad things happen when they betray or disobey, and they all have demon names. It's not that they're inherently bad beings or people even, but that is their whole purpose, whether they agree with it or not. And even the most righteous of gods like King Deshret, who stand against this entire hierarchy, will ultimately perish. The 11 Harbingers and the Fatui, along with the Cryo Archon, are humanity's last hope, the last hope of Teyvat. But what happens when humanity does take control of Teyvat and seize authority from the gods like Piero states? Will everything be fixed? Or will the cycle of conflict, control, power, manipulation just continue? But instead of Teyvat being governed by Celestia or gods, it's just humans. The same thing, the same concept, just a new name slapped in front of it. I guess we'll only ever know when this story finally wraps up a few years from now. And even though Genshin usually leaves us with more questions than answers, one thing I can say for sure from playing this game for years now is whether you're a god or a regular mortal, you're not perfect and you're going to make a ton of mistakes along the way. It's how you react to them. But thank you for watching. I do hope you enjoyed the video. It is an interesting topic to talk about because we have so little detail about it and there's so many different types of gods. The term is just very thrown around, so diluted to the point where everything and everyone almost seems to be a god that the name itself sort of loses its meaning, but did it ever have meaning to begin with? I do hope the anime covers up a lot of the backstory in Teyvat and a lot of the hidden lore and meaning that we just don't get in-game. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe. Help grow the channel. I do appreciate you all watching this far. And as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.